Vally Wieselthier was a star designer. She was one of several. Maria Licard and Mathilde Vlogel they were constantly being presented in the different journals and newspapers in Vienna. But Wieselthier, it was also, she had a longer history with exposure. She was a star designer who carefully fashioned her role as a leading handicraft woman artist. I suggest that Wieselthier constructed a kind of a fictional and real anthropology of women in order to explore the power relations between men and women, specifically the effects of the coercion of men on women's sexuality and their subjectivity. Thank you. Yeah. Wieselthier presents her in her work a kind of a scientific artistic. This is her star design. There was even a movie made in 1935 using her name on a Kunstgewerblerin with Vesely, and in 1935, and this is one of her many portraits that decorated the newspapers at the time. I suggest that she explored the power relations between men and women, specifically the effects of the coercion of men on their sexuality and subjectivity. Wieselthier presents in her work a kind of scientific, artistic, I'm repeating it because it's in English, project in which she depicts the woman yet interferes in the presentation of her findings through marking or freeing her woman subjects. How is she doing it? She's doing it, we will see it later on with her works, but she's somehow identifying in her works, in the individual sculptural and also design works, the social stand, the relationship status, and she examines their performances. Is there kneeling, reclining, standing? She indicates the health condition. She might sometimes exposes the blue effects under the lines of a sleepless night, or the skin, the unsmooth skin. She refers to the health condition. And she also reveals the body language. For the body language, you could see if they are turning their aggressions against themselves or against someone else. She analyzes them, and we will see it later on in some of the examples. So, and once more, that is very important for the talk, is the relation to material goods. The dresses, the hats, the different fashion articles, and the necklace, how she works with it. Now, why am I referring to the idea of how important it is to analyze her iconography is because later on, 80 years later, we will find similar iconography with leading artists, African-American Kara Walker, and you will have also Cindy Sherman coming up here today. So a lot of her iconography, I would say, was pioneering and somehow an early feminist approach to design. Now, she's working as a designer. She perceives herself as a designer. She writes as a designer in her manifesto, and she reconstructs in her articles how she's working. But at the same time, she uses the design works, the jar, the book stand, in order to provoke, in order to challenge given stereotypes of women. And the main issue that she attacks in her work are actually patriarchal strategies of commodifying women in society. So here I compare her with the shadow figures or the paper cuts of Kara Walker, and I see a kind of, you could see kind of an iconography, it could be like a kind of a scene before the transformation of Daphne into a tree and Apollo chasing her from the metamorphoses. Or she could be any other woman being attacked behind her. And this is a very early work from 1917. And I compare it to Kara Walker and her attempts, and I also have a very strong statement by Kara Walker stating about, this is my subjectivity, this is the limitations that society imposed upon myself that I need to come true in order to break through from this limitation. So this is something very critical in the work. Now, the methodology or the kind of a theoretical reference I'm using is a very strong statement by an Algerian-French feminist from the 1970s, Hélène Cixous, The Love of the Medusa, and I think this is the main tactic she's using in her design work. A feminist text, I mean, I'm quoting, a feminist text cannot fail to be more than subversive. It is volcanic. As it's written, it brings about an upheaval of the old property crust, carrier of masculine investments. There is no other way, there's no room for her if she's not a he. A he, if she is a she. It is in order to smash everything, to shatter the framework of institution, to blow up the law, to break up the truth with laughter. And you could see, and here the photo of Vally Wieselthier with her mask. You could see the many masks, like as if she's a woman who consciously, if you think about Cindy Sherman later on, and her taking different roles of film figures of women, you see the masks here as a kind of a strategy to challenge. This is not one face. I have many faces that are according for Anthropology of women, or here is a kind of a mask place that I could take the role and challenge it. So in many ways, she's already using it. And speaking about the Medusa and the Medusa quote, the Medusa was actually a woman who had sex at the temple of Athena, and she was punished for it, and her hair became snake. She was a good-looking woman, and then she became, for many, until today actually, many feminist designers and artists, the kind of a heroine, a woman who did come to terms with her sexuality or did allow herself, and then she was punished for it, a kind of a historical lesson that should be challenged. And you could see her figures of the Medusa running and ready in the book stand, and you could see it in a fire casing that she is already. Now here I refer again to the Anthropology of women and what kind of a reference she makes in her art. I think many of them she refers to the social status through the clothing or through the idea of as I said, the fashion articles, the reference to again. So she is checking in her work these figures. Some of them come from a fictional figure, some of them are from real fiction, from real figures. And she refers to the literary background in the city. So this is a very early work, well, not so early, 1926, in which you could see the element of the commodification of Frau. It's a man sitting behind a woman. She's a bit with her shoulders are being exposed as if she's, to hire her status as an object of commodity. Her hands are being tied with a necklace. I mean, she's a kind of almost like a slave selling, and you have the colonialist imagery below, the Far Eastern servant and the African servant underneath. So you have a kind of a challenge of a West male colonialist patronizing image here, and I related to a statement that was censored in 1898 of a play by Scheu and Stossel. Stossel was a client of Adolf Loos. Scheu was a companion of Adolf Loos, Ware called, and it's about woman-Ware. It's about thematizing woman as a commodity in society. And one of the main statements made later in 1911, when it was originally performed, was Nein, es ist meinen Körper, meine Wohnung, meinen Cognac, meine Divan. So it's a kind of an attempt to reclaim herself from being the commodity of male society. Now, one of the things that she and also Cindy Sherman does later on in the history portraits are to come to terms, like with the Medusa, also with the biblical figures, like Abishag. Abishag was a young woman who was chosen to warm up the bed of King David in the Bible in his late days. And many of the modernists, like Rilke and people who published in the Viennese Zeitung and in the newspapers, and also in the Sturm, the German, played with the woman of Abishag as something that is like a kind of a toy, like a kind of inspiration, an artistic inspiration. And you could see how she shows her humiliation in a way, here less, but then she uses the sentence from vom Rilke, but und sah ihre gefühles Grundrute, neigte sich nicht herab zu seinem Grund. She uses it in her late version of Abishag. And you could see it somehow, I would say, the fact that she's using the glaze drip on the body, on the white body. The glaze drip is to show, first of all, the decomposing of the clothing, of the skirt. And it's also a kind of a decomposing of the psyche. So the cloth has a kind of a representation of the psyche. And you have Abishag very, very dominant in the newspapers, which I was surprised even to discover myself. Now, I compared it to Cindy Sherman and how she provokes the idea of the femme fatale, of the fin de siècle. Yeah, this Judith who is supposed to behead Holofernes, actually a very religious woman who had nothing to do originally with sexual, but since the mid of the 19th century became very sexualized. So this is another woman, biblical woman, who was completely sexualized in the fin de siècle, and later on picked up by feminist Cindy Sherman, reworking an older masterpiece and showing actually the construction of the image, how it's. Then you have another stereotype of woman that she works about, the floration of woman, the idea that woman is losing her virginity. And from Grimm's Wörterbuch, they have as a plucking a flower, the blooming as the virginity. And she has two works, 1920 and 1928, of the idea of this woman discovering her sexuality. She's holding a flower in her hand and she's placing her hand between the legs. This is the very early one she's doing. Then you have a later one, which we see in the exhibition, actually. You have Klimt, the famous Klimt, which actually visualizing it. He's cutting her head, he's cutting her virginity, he's plucking her away. Who knows if they had actually a relationship, but in the scene itself of the kiss, he's cutting her head as if he's plucking a flower. And this is a very violent, sexist, but still one of the masterpieces of Viennese modernism. And she is somehow working it in her own way. There are many flowers, so there are many ways. I mean, she's like renewing the flowers each time, kind of maybe a woman's fantasy. And she's using the custom by Peche, who shows cut branches in order to actually smear the legs to somehow show her dirt, like it's a dirt, like it's a kind of a revelation of a woman's subjectivity about her own body and about how she is reclaiming her body from the stereotypes of the social expectations. Then you have Wieselthier herself, who said that her mother constantly read the Wiener Mode. Yeah, her mother was a good, well-to-do woman, high society. She felt that mode was one of her references to culture in Vienna, and the reference to women as being bought or being commodified as a kind of a through the jewelry. You saw it already with the hands tied, with a necklace. Here you have it with a girl monkey somehow playing with the necklace. And in a way, if we speak about the anthropology of women, you could see how she's challenging all these society-loaded value things in her own. Then you have her imitating fashion models, and they're very elegant, delicate way of standing and moving. It's as if she's exaggerating the theatrical element of it. One of the things that came very through in the 1920s was the commodification of the Susse medal. This is something that was very important. This is something that was a fictional figure of a naive girl from the suburbs of Vienna, that the city gentleman is abusing her, or is using her as a pastime entertainment. And in the interwar period, she became actually like a film product. And there's also the idea, the questioning, gibt es noch das Susse, als ob es überhaupt gab, ja? Das Susse medal, blonde oder brunette, you know. So this was part of the discourse in society that was very critical, and I think she is depicting, and I'm not sure how is she working it. Yeah, for example, in 1932 you have a hairdress like the Susse medal. And these are two works she did for the Wiener Werkstätte. And I think I was really looking at it for some time, and I was thinking, what is she just replicating it? Is she just reproducing this kind of a gentle woman? But I think through her body language that she goes like this with the tilted hair, she's turning kind of a circle of protection over her. But this could be an overinterpretation. But still, I think that she's a body language. We have to read the body language here with her. Then Vally Wieselthier, yeah. I think she allowed herself to be so critical and to really challenge, and she came out partly because of her background. Not only that she came from a well-to-do family with real estate. Her mother was involved with the real estate, and she inherited real estate. Her father was a court lawyer, but she was also, and this is critical, I think, for the experience when we speak about education of the future generation. She was also competing as a swimmer and a sportswoman. She won several, until the 1920s, well into the beginning of her participation in the Wiener Werkstätte, she was very much self-assured. So she was a winner in her own, as a sportswoman before even she became a designer. This is something very critical because as a sportswoman, she had a very strong self-aware of her body. So she knew exactly, and here you see, and in this regard, you have very few. This could be a passable swimmer. I looked for swimming women in her work. I found very few. This is one of them. This is her being in 1914 as a swimmer, and I must tell you, you have all these stereotypes in the newspapers and in the journals, but at the same time, you have a very clear direction of showing professional women, sportswomen as a winners. Now here they are a bit below. You could see the hierarchy, men above, women below. Yeah, but still, you see the woman in bathing suit very well assured. So you have these two elements in the Viennese discourse, the public discourse. You have the professional woman, the sportswoman, very well assured, coming up. And you have the stereotypes that are constantly reproduced of the Susan medal, of the exhibitionist woman, etc. And I was trying to see if some of her work, like Expectation, which is actually an erotic pose, it could be an erotic expectation to have the men's view looking at her, or it could be another swimming before her. Like she's using this double meaning of what the woman is expecting about in her work. And I compared it to Cindy Sherman. Again, it's a kind of a classic defying pose of in her look, very, very expecting at the same time. So she has these parallel figures, but I would say, in a sense, the way she stages the woman is very clear, a kind of attempt to reclaim or to smash the idea of a woman as a commodity in society. Now, this is another story that came out from Arthur Schnitzler in 1924 and became a movie in 1929, Fräulein Elsa, Miss Elsa, in which a 19 years a girl is supposed to save her father from the ruin by asking a man for money, and he expects her actually to stand naked in front of him, and this brings her to her ruin because she has this conflict. Either she's going to save her father and destroy herself, or she will save herself. And the whole monologue that goes with Arthur Schnitzler is something very strong, but it's true that men expected women to exhibit their bodies, and there were also other stereotypes that have been also in the science discourse. For example, narcissism by Sigmund Freud, about beautiful women being more in love with themselves than with other women. And interesting enough, the movie that was based on Vally Wieselthier, Vally Gärtner in episode, so one of the two photos that were mostly reproduced in the newspapers was about Paola Vesely looking at the image as if it's like a mirror image, like the narcissist. And I think, in a way, this is Vally Wieselthier, she yeah, she plays with the idea of woman as an exhibition for a dancer. She uses the review dancer. But at the same time, this is a figure that I was wondering about. She plays a head in it. She shows the demonization. So in a very subtle way, she shows the idea that how exhibitionism could also lead to dehumanization, and at the same time, the very well-reproduced modern youth is about the fetishism of the young girl, and the idea by showing an oversized young woman made up as if she is a clown with the cheeks being overpainted. So women were expected to be exhibitionists. It was part of their, even when they spoke about Gerda Gabo and Marlene Dietrich, it's about their exhibitionism. It's their exhibitionism. It's not the men who expect them to be, to show themselves naked. And we have from Judith through Elsie Altman Loss, the woman of Adolf Loss, the later very young, he's very old, promoting herself as a dancer in 1922. You have the review of Josephine Baker for Schwarz auf Weiß, also as a peeping Tom scene being promoted. And so the question is, what did Vally Wieselthier did this with this? What did she do with this review girl, with the idea of the woman playing with the snake, with the scarves of Salome? How did she overwork it in her own? And it's very interesting, all those that were presented, photos that were presented by the gallery that owns the work, are rather good looking. She looks very brave and nice, yeah. But if you look closer, and you could look closer at the front of Wiener Werkstätte, this amazing sculpture, you could see that really the way she handled the body is not very smooth, and they are dripping, and she used the glaze drip, and actually the whole dress is being decomposed with the colors. It's as if it's decomposing of the colors of the dress. And what is worse even, what is worse or what is great, she has her eyes made, so she has two eyes. One will have a very nice black eye, and then you have this weird makeup. Yeah, so you could see that the kind of a psychological stress or psychological, and at the same time, you have, this is what is so amazing working on women in the interwar period, you have other artists like Helene Funke who worked on their psychological falling apart. So you have it as part of the intercourse. Then I compare her also in regard to the body language, to the idea of like as if she's going to box herself, and you with the Cindy Sherman Untitled 299, with her finger being pointed to her head. So this idea of self-aggression that also comes up at the end of Fräulein Elsa, in which she kills herself. This is something that is very critical to the idea of women reclaiming their bodies and smashing the idea of the concept of woman as a commodity in society at the end. So to conclude, I think when she is photographed, and these are all photos that were reproduced at the time in the journals, she is the perfect handicraft woman. She's dressed very well. She's really like, she's with her objects, she's sitting, and she's really very serious. She's a very proud, self-assured designer woman, designer artist woman. When you look at her works, these are sculptures for the garden or for the interior, you could see how the provocation and the challenging of the stereotypes of women in society is coming through. Also referring back to the anthropology of women and how she's handling the state of the relationship to makeup, to jewelry, to the clothing, the falling apart of her clothing, the tattered color, dresses. And the blue eyes is as if she had someone, she have a blue eye, like someone, or she's making a joke of the eyeliner with the enlarged blue line. And this, I think, when, yesterday we spoke about women's museums and women's archives and what is there still to do about women designers and artists. I think a lot of what we have to do is simply look one by one in every work that has been seen and is available and try to analyze it in relation to what was going on in the newspaper, what was going on in her biography. Like really do an iconographic that for men it's almost selbstverständlich that you will do a kind of a history of his career before you start presenting his work in public. And I think this is why it was so important to me to take a kind of a star designer into work. We have many more. We have Marielle Katz, Matilda Flogel. We have others women that are waiting to be discovered, and I think they have a lot to offer. In this case, I chose Vally Wieselthier. And how challenging of commodity, a woman as commodity. So thank you very much.